So that's ready to go. All right, so we're at 12 o'clock. I'm going to start admitting people from the waiting room. So give me just a moment here. All right, Janelle, you can get started whenever you're ready.
Perfect. Great. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. It is now 12 o'clock, and I would like to welcome you to today's webinar, Fast Track Delivery, Balancing Capital Projects and Operations. My name is Janelle Caratero, and I'm part of ISPE's Boston's Educational Programs Committee. And I, along with Mohammed Riaz, will be your meeting manager for today's program. Before we get started, I'm just going to go through a few housekeeping items. First of all, I'd like to thank our program sponsors, KPS, ICQ Consultants, and Massey Bioservices. Next, some information on how to participate in today's events. All attendees are automatically muted, but you may send in your questions at any time during the presentation using the Zoom chat feature. We will collect these questions and address them at the end of today's presentation, but we welcome you to input them at any point during the presentation. On behalf of the EPC, I'd like to invite you to get involved with the chapter by volunteering with our committee. We meet the first Wednesday of every month at 5:30 over Zoom and discuss and plan out the topics and speakers for our monthly education webinars. We'd love to have some fresh perspectives, and liaising with speakers and industry experts is a great way to expand your network. We hope you'll consider joining. Lastly, we hope you'll continue the conversation on the chapter social media platforms listed here. I'd like to thank our speakers for participating today, and with that, do some quick introductions. For today's presentation, we're going to hear from Rob Calvert, Design Manager at Jacobs, Eric Karch, Senior Director of Global Reagent Manufacturing, Laboratory Diagnostics, and Supply Chain Management at Siemens Healthineers, Greg Keller, Project Executive at Columbia Construction.
This never works every year.
And lastly, I'll hand it off to our panel moderator, Dennis Lucey, who is the Managing Director of the Northeast Pharma Team, PMA Consultants. Yes.
Thank you, Janelle. And Janelle put in a request there for help. This has been a great experience working with these teams, Catherine, Mohammed, and Janelle. Thanks so much for this. This is a really fun topic, and I'm glad we have a great turnout today. So, thank you. So we're excited to share our story about fast track delivery and our lessons learned. We have a neat project to talk about, so let's jump right in. Okay, so here's our agenda for today. We're going to do quick, brief speaker introductions, then transition to just spend a few minutes on what is fast track delivery and its pros and cons. We are then going to study our case study. Siemens Healthineers had a substantial project down in Walpole, Mass. That recently completed, and we're hoping to talk to you about that, where we hope to share our lessons learned and key takeaways. And then, as Janelle noted, we are going to, we anticipate our presentation should only take 40 minutes or so, and therefore we should have some Q&A at the tail end. So use that chat feature in Zoom to put in any questions, and or you can answer them, ask them live at the end of the presentation. All right. So as Janelle mentioned, my name is Dennis Lucey. I'm a managing director here in the Boston office of PMA Consultants. PMA provides project management, project control services throughout the US. And my role on this project was the project controls lead, where we were involved from early inception through project closeout, trying to manage the cost, schedule, and risks of the project. So with that, I will hand it to Mr. Eric Karch.
Hi, everybody. I'm Eric Karch. I'm the Senior Director in Global Reagent Manufacturing at Siemens Healthineers. Siemens Healthineers is a global leader in medical imaging, lab diagnostics, and healthcare IT. Our site here in Walpole, Mass. is the Global Reagent Manufacturing site for laboratory diagnostics. My role on this project was the operations lead and subject matter expert for all of our laboratory operations, as well as for reagent manufacturing. And with that said, I will turn it over to Greg.
Hi, I'm Greg Keller. I'm the project executive for Columbia. Columbia is an almost 100-year-old family-run construction management firm, and it's one of the largest in the Boston area, serving a full range of market sectors: life sciences, corporate, healthcare, academic, and energy. I've had the pleasure and honor of working with my co-panelists on the Siemens Healthineers Walpole Manufacturing Expansion Project, aptly named Project Markup. My role on this project was a project executive and construction coordinator for Columbia. With that, Rob Calvert.
All right. Hello, everybody. I'm Rob Calvert. I'm a senior project manager with Jacobs. So Jacobs is the largest provider of EPCM and CQV services to pharma and biotech. And my role in this project is to lead the architectural and engineering team and support construction and Dennis and Siemens. Okay. With that, we'll move on.
Awesome. Thank you. So let's transition here and talk about what fast track delivery really is. So fast track delivery at its highest level, and if you're not speaking, please mute if you're able to. Thank you. At the highest level, fast track delivery is a project management approach where activities are performed in parallel instead of a sequential start to finish methodology. Typically, this involves overlapping of key project phases like design, procurement, construction, and even validation. And typically often involves the development of distinct or discrete work packages, so that even a work package could be accelerated and overlapped in different areas at the same time. So we thought a graphical example might help explain this better, and I'm sure most folks are familiar with the typical design bid build process highlighted at the top, where you can see that phases of the project complete before we start the next phase. In our fast track methodology, you can see that we're overlapping wherever we can, and that does provide us with two great time-based benefits. One is it shrinks the overall duration of the job, but it also allows you to bring in incremental improvements. If you're able to bring a specific area or a specific piece of equipment online faster, again, that helps with time to market. But as you can imagine, this changes the overall project management approach, and therefore it affects resources, it affects communication, it affects risk, it affects the timing of the job. So certainly something to be aware of when you do decide about a fast track process. And that's some of the things we'll be digging into today during our session. So what are the pros? As noted, the primary is all about time. It allows for quicker execution, faster time to market. An important one for today's world, it limits potential escalation costs as you are shortening the overall project life cycle. So if you're considering, if a time component is significant to your project success and project goals, then fast track should be considered. It also allows a bunch of flexibility and really allows for owner input during the process. So those are two great things that benefited our role here in Walpole. But there are some significant items to be aware of that complicate a fast track delivery process. We talked about this internally, and definitely for our project felt the pros outweighed the cons here, which is why it was a good method for the delivery of this job. But some of those are, there is an obvious increased and ongoing communication effort and managerial effort to manage the numerous additional handoffs that are created. As you begin to overlap those tasks, you need to be very clear about communication. You need to be very clear about alignment. You need to have shared understandings of what goals are. And then our last bullet here is about regulation. Our team also discovered challenges that are associated with accelerating and phasing a highly regulated process like validation. And we'll talk about that a little bit longer here. So there are other ways to have a fast project. One of them, as most people are probably aware of, is the design build process. And a couple key differences we wanted to highlight here. The fast track project does allow for owner input as opposed to handing off the process to a design build entity. The owner is able to comment and be involved in the process throughout the process a little longer. This is particularly important on complex projects where owner requirements may not be fully defined or stakeholder requirements may not be defined at the start. And then finally, it's important to note that the project risk is different. The project risk remains with the owner for a longer period of time, whereas in a DB project, the risk pendulum swings over to the design builder at an earlier time frame. With that, I will hand it to Eric, who's going to walk us through the actual project itself.
Great. Thanks, Dennis. So what I'd like to do is just kick things off with a brief video, which discusses Siemens Healthineers and the project that we'll be discussing today.
Siemens Healthineers is one of the largest diagnostic manufacturers in the world. Our state-of-the-art manufacturing facility here in Walpole, Massachusetts is arguably the largest of its kind. We produce immunodiagnostic reagents used to treat millions of people around the globe, suffering from conditions such as HIV, hepatitis, or more recently, COVID-19. In 2016, the facility was approaching its capacity. We needed to expand to meet the growing demand for these critical products. The scale of this expansion meant that we needed to expand all utilities, expand all unit operation, increase the storage and manufacturing areas, and nearly double the population on the site. To execute this expansion would require the modification of over 85% of the entire campus, all while maintaining rigorous FDA requirements. We turned to trusted partners with a demonstrated track record of success and recognized expertise in their fields, primarily Jacobs Engineering, Columbia Construction, PMA consultants, as well as other key contributors. This team developed a strategy consisting of 43 interdependent projects, each with their own unique design packages, construction approaches, and challenges. This enabled incremental expansion without adverse impact to ongoing operations. Certainly, we can be proud that this project was done on time and on budget. More important than that, many people came together and worked more than 1 million hours to create a world-class manufacturing facility for diagnostic reagents. From day one, the team embraced the motto, "We are one team, working for one purpose, to make a positive impact to billions of people."
Okay, so next slide, please, Dennis. So now I'd like to just talk about a little bit of the whys. So Siemens Healthineers and our former namesakes, because we've been bought and sold numerous times over the course of the last 3 decades. We've experienced about 30 years of double-digit growth in test volume. And with the current market that was expected to continue to grow, led by significant growth in the China markets, we felt as though it was the time to take action in order to keep up with the demand in the near future. Next slide, please. Okay. As part of our due diligence, we looked at 10 different options, ranging anywhere from greenfield projects, expanding existing sites, along with actually bridge programs so that we had the opportunity to potentially delay full investment. The key attributes that we needed to take into consideration were timing, obviously, of the timing of the incremental capacity that we needed to achieve, feasibility of the implementation. And then what was also important was having access to our technical resources and our local product knowledge. Our site in Walpole, a little background on our site in Walpole. We house manufacturing, R&D, OEM management, which is our partners that we work with for some of our supply, along with IT functions, and along with a lot of other some varied support functions that support not only our site, but some of our other corporate sites. We manufacture immunoassay, molecular, and point-of-care diagnostic test kits. We have approximately 1,100 employees on site today that spans across 810,000 square feet of building. We operate our manufacturing processes in ISO 8, 7, and ISO 5 clean space. And we run 3 shifts, 5 days a week in manufacturing and in fill pack. And then we run 2 shifts in QC, manufacturing, and most other functions. And that dynamic there is changing, as we continue to increase our test volume. In terms of the scope of the project, the most significant telling scope of the project was to increase our capacity of our site by approximately 2x. This would be done by expanding our manufacturing footprint by approximately 50% through renovation of old spaces and the creation of new spaces. We would also more than double our water usage and our warehouse storage, along with an increase in our power consumption by almost 2 times. What was most important as we executed this project was, a reduction in time to market. We needed to get things into operation as soon as possible, and any incremental gains we could make along the way were very important. We also realized in that same breath that we needed to realize capacity gains, right? We needed to realize those gains with numerous functions, not just manufacturing, but all the other lab operations as well that were already struggling with capacity. And we needed to limit the impact. We needed to not disrupt the operation at all unless this was planned and scheduled with all functions within the facility. We really didn't have the luxury of shutdowns during routine business hours for more than a few hours. The only other option was really having shutdowns off hours, weekends, and nights. In looking at this project in its entirety across the site, what you'll see in this graphic are areas that are highlighted in yellow and purple. Those are all the areas that we impacted during this project. There were not many parts of this facility that weren't touched in some way. A similar picture held true for other floors of the facility, as this really only represents the first floor of our facility. During this project, we executed on 45 unique projects, some temporary, in order to make small incremental gains and not disrupt routine production. This involved new builds, as I mentioned before, as well as major renovations to some of our laboratories. At this point, I'd like to turn it over to Dennis to kick off some of our lessons learned.
Great, thanks, Eric. For the lessons learned section, we're going to take turns and talk about lessons learned from a couple different perspectives, from overall project organization to design and construction. So I'm going to kick it off here with a few about project organization and project controls. So as our team gathered to put this presentation together, we really kept coming back to one consistent theme, which was about communication and alignment. As Eric just showed, and as that graphic just showed, there was a lot of moving pieces and a lot of areas that needed to be touched. And as we move forward, we didn't know every detail of the project, but we knew what was important. We knew what our goals were, and that drove a successful completion. So what did we align on? We aligned on big picture turnovers and big key milestones. One of probably the best things that we did early on was develop a project execution plan. This allowed us to align on those key goals, but still have flexibility where we needed to adjust to like operational needs or changing customer demand. So as we saw from that phase graphic, you could see that a lot of different components of the building were touched, and we were really touching 85% of the campus, if I remember correctly. So the complexity of this program really required a detailed plan and approach. How were we going to meet increasing customer demand? How could we construct hundreds of millions of dollars of construction in spaces that were directly adjacent to operating suites that operated 24/7? So how we approached this was we began to think about the processes about in a work stream manner. We began to think about how manufacturing worked, or cold storage worked, or warehousing. Even down to the level of office space and parking. Could we keep the operation running while maintaining these things? So we started with with the end in mind. So we initially started thinking about number one on this list, which was the customer demand. How was customer demand changing, and what were those projections? That led us to understand what areas what spaces, what systems we needed to enhance, develop, rebuild in order to get capacity increases. Knowing what the critical bottlenecks were, knowing where we needed new space versus our enhancement, that allowed us to start thinking about what the construction and bid packages would look like. Finally, bringing us back to how we actually develop the design packages. How do we bundle the work into appropriate design packages so we can get started to start meeting those initial required capacity increases that we needed on close to day one, and what could languish or push to the tail end of the project. So we took that process and we modeled it through, we took the work stream education and this backwards planning process. And what we arrived at was this roadmap to the right. And this basically was the 45 projects that showed the interdependencies between the projects. There's no time scale here. This just demonstrates how one project would affect another, and really driven by work streams. Different colors indicated different buildings. Criticality of whether it was a critical path activity was driven by the yellow activities, the yellow links, and the gray links indicated logic relationships, but at the current time they weren't driving. So this roadmap paired with our PEP was a really valuable tool for everybody. Eric mentioned operational needs, and that that was really the driver, maintaining operations while still building capacity. One example of that was through the QC Tech Lab, QC Tech Ops Lab. Our initial planning process defined an approach that consisted of a 3-phase renovation of this existing lab, which allowed us to maintain operations, but due to its configuration and complexity of construction, it required a 3-phase process shown at the top here, each phase taking 8 months and therefore taking about 2 years. This was less than ideal for the stakeholders. This was less than ideal for the construction timeline. So what the team did is we gathered the stakeholders over the course of several interactive planning sessions to define a new approach. Again, we kept the end goal in mind, but how we did it was variable, right? And we used this type of method to revise a plan and give us the schedule benefits, the cost benefits, and operational benefits. So staying on the communication theme, I think one of our most valuable tools, and something that I think everyone referred to on a daily basis, was our integrated master schedule. This is, basically what the team did was we aligned on key milestones and touch points, which drove the overall schedule. But each party, and whether that was Jacobs with design, Columbia with construction, or DPS with validation, each party was responsible for their own level 4, level 5, very detailed schedule. And what we did was we took those schedules and rolled them back up into an integrated master schedule based on those defined touch points. We did this on a monthly basis at a minimum, and then that provided the team the necessary assurances that we're all moving in the right direction. So with that, I'm going to hand it to Rob, who's going to now lead us through a couple of design items.
All right, great. Thank you, Dennis. So from a design standpoint, fast track execution, it's not your typical linear design execution strategy, is readily apparent. Phases overlap, and careful planning was required to ensure that everything fit together the right way. A few common things that we had to focus on throughout the project were, great communication, accessibility to team members, and understanding what we had and where we needed to get to in the most efficient, least disruptive, and fastest way. Next slide. So you've heard it several times already. Communication, clear communication was a key part of this project. Frank, honest communication. Delivering bad news is something that we all have to face at some point, and we couldn't be shy about doing that. If something needed to change, we needed to communicate. Egos were not an issue. As engineers, many of us are set in our ways, but we had to take a step back, start with the end in mind, and know not to take any changes in direction personally. It was important. The chemistry with this team was very important, and a team is always a key point of every project, and I think we had the right people on this project. We all had to be good listeners. We had to keep our cool and be patient. And as noted earlier, we functioned as one team working with one purpose. We had the right tools in place to reach out to each other. We still have each other's phone numbers on speed dial, and we all spoke several times a day, just about sometimes trivial issues, but it was really necessary to keep things moving. You know, we used electronic tools like email and things like that, but a phone call was always the best way to resolve an issue. You know, that communication. Other tools, you know, this was pre-COVID, but we had already embraced tools like Microsoft Teams and WebEx, and you know, Columbia had some great tools with their extranet tool, and we also used things like PlanGrid. So all great things that we utilized. And one thing that was very important also was engaging the stakeholders and having regular standing meetings to keep everyone engaged on where the project was headed. Next slide. Another important part of our design execution and overall execution was co-location of the team. When the team initially assembled, you know, Eric and members of his team, they spent a significant amount of time at the engineering offices of Jacobs. You know, it was probably close to 5 or 6 months worth of time where we would constantly, you know, challenge our execution philosophy and make sure we understood, again, where are we starting and where did we need to get to. As the project evolved, the center of gravity migrated obviously to the project work site. You know, core members of the design team then kind of shifted their presence to being in the field near the construction site. And that was still during design that we did that. So that was a very important part. Having that accessibility and FaceTime with people was important, that co-location. Next slide. All right, so when people ask me about this project, I immediately in my mind, I go to the little slide puzzle that maybe some of you played with as a child or still play with as an adult. You know, the graphic that you see here, it's not that resolute, but it shows the different functions on the first floor of all the buildings in the facility. They're indicated by the different colors. So you see manufacturing, packaging, new mechanical spaces. This particular site had been opportunistically renovated over many years. So things didn't always fit next to each other properly. So a big challenge for the team as a whole was to best determine how to optimize the flows, group functions together. And a phrase we used to use is keep the right people close to the flame, which is the manufacturing process. So, you know, another challenge in understanding was you know, these buildings, again, being renovated opportunistically, there are a lot of unknowns. You know, what's in a particular wall? Well, what are you going to find when you tear that down during this renovation? So understanding to the best of our ability what was there was very important. So again, developing the strategy was like solving the slide puzzle, except our slide puzzle wasn't 4 by 4, as you see there. It was more like a 7 by 7 puzzle. You know, every move we made had the potential to impact another space. So it really had to be carefully planned and designed. Next slide. So again, end of the day, we had to start with the end in mind, determine how to move the pieces and do the least amount of, have the least amount of impact on other things and do it all quickly. So, you know, at the end of the day, all those puzzle pieces needed to be, you know, all the yellows in one line, all the reds in the next line, all the greens in the next line in numerical order. So, you know, we solved our 7 by 7 puzzle in about 45 moves. Next slide, Dennis. So, you know, end of the day, a really important part of this team was the relationships that we had with each other. We were able to reassemble a team. About 2/3 of the people on this project had worked previously on a project together across the 4 organizations. That was really important. We hit the ground running. We picked up right where we left off. We already understood a lot of aspects of the site and some of the buildings. You know, we really had to develop a clear understanding of all the minute details and interactions between all the spaces. You know, at times we had to bend, I'll say bend the rules or change our execution plan. And we were able to do that. The team was nimble and patient. You know, we incorporated some things, we call them rolling reviews, where we would spend a day or two going through certain aspects of the design, flipping through the design drawings, ensuring that there were no surprises when we got to the key milestones, you know, 60% review, 90% review. So communication was key. Expediting submittal reviews was also key. And, basically being nimble and working as one unit was really key. So, in summary, great communications, accessibility, flexibility, and an understanding of where we were and knowing where we needed to get to were key parts of this project being successful. And I think next I will pass along to Greg, who can talk a little bit about how we actually executed the construction.
Yeah, thank you, Rob. I actually think you undersell your component to the project. The challenges that you faced were immense. But, as Dennis said at the beginning, that a comprehensive project execution plan was essential for project success. And one component, was design needs. The other component was how do you construct this during a full operation, a full manufacturing plant. So part of the execution plan, Columbia Construction that had about a 38-year history on the campus, as Eric said, through a number of owners. So we had intimate knowledge of operations in campus, and we were brought on in an early construction management advisory role to help with the overall planning and to understand the complexities of how to construct. We were able to work with Jacob's team. We assisted in defining some of the scopes and contents of each design package. We were also able to identify long lead equipment items, allowing Jacobs to develop advanced specifications so that we could support procurement and schedule. As the advisor, we also were charged with developing an overall estimate and project construction budget. This was all critical to the process moving forward. Next slide, then. Some of the interesting little aspects and logistics was the existing campus. The existing campus comprised of 5 different buildings, 3 of which were connected with one long corridor. And this corridor was essential for operations moving to and from. They actually aptly named it Route 1. A major portion of the renovation during this construction project actually intersected Route 1, both on the sides and above it. We actually had a structural second floor that had to go in over the top of it. So this is just one of the typical construction challenges. So on the left-hand side, you'll see an actual 3D model of a concept we came up with like a structural tunnel through the construction area. And as construction and design continued, the picture on the right is the actual, what we ended up with, pretty similar in the thought process. Again, with Jacob's support, we were able to design a structural element that allowed everybody to work safely. Next slide.
I think it's good to note here that your graphic actually shows the right curve because most of the campus was built on a curved platform. So not a lot of 90 degrees in this building. So
no, there weren't. Unfortunately, this is from the opposite end, so the curve goes the other way. But
yeah.
But anyway, as Rob stated, his challenge was like a slide puzzle. When we got to the construction act, phase of the project, it really turned into more like a Rubik's Cube. Not only did we have to deal with design, bidding, procurement, we also had to deal with manufacturing ongoing, people movement. It was quite a feat. So we had multiple concurrent activities happening at all times. The first of the 43 construction projects was started in March of 17. While construction continued, Jacob's team would go on to develop over 120 additional design packages over the next 13 months. So that gives you the idea of why fast track is advantageous, because in a normal design process, this would have taken 13 to 16 months. And Rob, correct me if I'm wrong on that. So what we were able to do is identify, early projects that were required. Rob's team put out a design package. We were able to put it out to bid and then continue construction going along. And in support of this, this scheduling activity, not only did Rob's team put out different design packages, we also broke them into issue for bid packages and issue for construction packages. So what we would do is we would get an 85–90% of the area project defined. Rob would put together a package. We would send it out to bid. We'd actually award on that scope with additional contingencies written in, while Rob's team finished up the small details and changed it into construction documents. The graph at the right pretty much shows, it's like a three-month snapshot of the overlapping activities that were going from the construction end. We were in construction, which is the green. We were in procurement, shop drawings, and fabrication. And then the orange was the bidding process. And this continued. This is the first 3 months of the project, but this continued for a 13-month effort. So, and we Columbia on our end, we supported this team or we supported this effort with 3 separate teams. We had a pre-construction team that was doing the bidding, our procurement team, and then finally our construction team on the site. Next slide, please. You know, a positive side effect of creating the multiple design packages was the ability to maximize the labor resources. When this project started in 2017, the construction labor market was extremely tight. We were building casinos and improvements in the Boston area. So bidding 45 projects separately allowed us to share the wealth, as you were, and award different projects to different trade subcontractors. That way we could base it on the best qualified for the project type. You know, if it was, you know, office space, we could bid it to a sub that was experienced in office. If it was high manufacturing, high process manufacturing, it took a different trade type. So we could award it on the best qualified for the project type, their subcontractor resources, and what their backlogs were. As a result, we were able to have multiple trades, both union and non-union, all working simultaneously. For example, the project engaged 4 different electrical subcontractors working on, you know, 20 different projects. The same with process subcontractors, HVAC subcontractors. Overall, I believe we had over 120 different subcontractors engaged in this process in one time or another. As each individual project came to completion during the construction phase, individual turnover packages, this allowed us to create different turnover packages as opposed to waiting until the end. And this helped support, once the area was turned over, this helped support the next phase of the project, which was the validation project process. And with that, Eric, you want to touch base on that a little bit? Oh, sorry.
Yeah, so with validation, so we learned some valuable lessons as it relates to validation strategy and execution of that validation strategy. I think the most important part of that being that we needed to get the validation team involved as early in the process as possible, so that we could agree on strategy and design to fit the validation strategy process wherever possible. You know, we definitely, as a lesson learned, I believe we would have brought the validation team on a little bit earlier in our process. And I think the other important aspect is to include the validation team in on design package reviews, so that they then have the ability to comment on where the validation strategy may face challenges. So, for example, when you're trying to validate shared spaces or a phased construction approach to a specific space. The next lesson learned is as it relates to subject matter expert involvement. And again, one of the most important aspects are communication. I think you'll hear that you hear that as a recurring theme, and I'm sure everybody's used to hearing that. But you can't undermine how important communication is, and beginning early in the process, and having I think consistent reviews with the site management as well as the individual functional teams that are essentially your local customer, or the customer that's occupying spaces that you're going to renovate or prepare new spaces for. I think next is to limit the day-to-day involvement of your key team members as much as possible. Obviously, what that does is it allows them to focus on the project execution and not be distracted. In our project, we had the luxury of actually taking out several members of our management team and moving them onto the project full time, and then backfilling them with the next important feature, which is bench strength, right? So it allows you the ability to call on others when resources start to get strained, right? And it allows you to backfill key team members. So again, another important aspect. And then lastly, right, in a project of this magnitude and the complexity that we've been talking about all through this presentation is change management. You know, everybody has to be flexible. You have to be agile, be able to make quick decisions and move quickly. And then, you know, your team members have to be strong change agents. They really have to, be, you know, ambassadors of change, because it's a significant change, especially when you're in and you're renovating an area that's currently being utilized. Next is, again, another important aspect, and we've touched on it a little bit here and there, but is having shared incentives. So the success of our project, you know, one of the keys to the success in our project was to have common goals across all of our disciplines and vendors. And those aligned both internally and externally. The goals we chose for our project, and everybody's maybe a little bit different, was just, you know, basically overall schedule. We had key milestones that we identified in the project that we all were striving to hit. Overall project costs, safety, and then limiting the number of business interruptions, right? One of the things that I've mentioned throughout is that, you know, we didn't have the luxury of shutdowns. We couldn't just shut the building down for a week. We were approaching capacity, and we just didn't have the luxury of taking operations down for very long periods of time. So with that said, I'd like to just recap some of the key aspects of fast track delivery that allowed us to meet our project goals. They are communication, flexibility, detailed planning, and goal alignment. And with that said, that wraps up the content portion of our presentation. I'd now like to give the floor back to Dennis, and so that we can address any questions that the attendees may have.
Mute. Okay. Thank you, Eric and Rob and Greg. That was great stuff. So I've seen a couple of questions come in, and we can hit the ones that are on the chat feature, but would like to open it up. If you have a question, type it in, and I'm not sure if we can do them through the audio, but type it in if you'd like to present something. I'm going to go through the list here and start at the top. So an early question before we presented the KPI slide was about how do we track KPIs? I'll take a first stab at that, and then I'll open it up to others. So PMA was very involved in the project controls front, and we were tracking costs and schedule and risk and resource assessments and safety events and business impacts or interruptions. We had a team of people who were on top of the cost and schedule on a regular basis. We had established goals, both, you know, from a long-term view, you know, are we on budget, but then also short-term. Are we hitting the interim goals? Are we, when design packages turn to construction packages, and construction packages were on the street, or bid packages were on the street? How were those coming in? How was contingency being managed? We, of course, would have monthly reports that developed a lot of red light, green light type activities. So I think that was, and all things being equal, those came in pretty well, and we were pretty happy with the performance across those. So
yeah, and I think the only thing I would add to that, Dennis, is that, you know, that your controls folks, along with our project folks, right, we met on a routine basis before those monthly reports came out, honed in, right, agreed upon how things were being assessed that month, and that I think helped that we were all very much in tune with how we were doing on KPIs as the project progressed.
Yep, great. I see a question around about delays and how many delays did you face? Well, I think it's inevitable that there are project delays. Things happen. Nothing goes according to plan. I think the important part is how you react to it. And Going back to the project controls aspect with the schedule, almost any time something went wrong, we would utilize the schedule to determine whether it was a critical path impact or not. As you can imagine, with 45 projects, that some of them, yeah, we had the ability to delay a certain area if it didn't drive capacity increase. That allowed us to free up some resources to be reallocated to items that were critical, that maybe had the risk of being late or over budget or whatnot. Anything to add to that, guys?
I think you hit it on the head, right? Balancing all those projects, there are some positives to that, right? That again, as long as you're not on the critical path with the project that's being delayed, you have some flexibility. And again, in terms of delays, as long as those delays weren't creating business interruptions, there wasn't a substantial impact to the site per se. And again, as Dennis pointed out, maintaining that critical path and watching that critical path so closely, I think helped us execute on time.
Super, thanks. There's a question in here about meetings and communication, and I think that Eric, Greg, or Rob, you guys want to chime in on what kind of meeting cadence we had and how we handled that?
Yeah, so I mean, I'll start just with a couple of meeting. So again, obviously, right, meeting with the team members. We met with the entire project team, right? So we had members from all disciplines, always meeting on a weekly basis, and then we had meetings outside of the project team with the local functional teams, where we would keep them abreast of what was going on, right? When were we going to impact that area? What do we need from that functional team? And then as a project team within Siemens, we also were keeping site management updated on a every other week basis. What we did is we had different functions come into our site management and give an overview of what was happening within that function or within that project team member's responsibility. So it gave the site management team an opportunity to ask questions and get their feedback into the process as soon as possible.
And to add to that, I want to dovetail on something Eric had said earlier, is Siemens was able to designate managers specifically for this project, and the co-location of having everybody within the same area. The Jacobs team was in a trailer, Columbia's team was in a trailer, and the Siemens team, they actually left the building and joined in the trailer. So, and Dennis's team was also there. So we were able to meet as required. We had standard, OAC meetings and design meetings, but having everyone in the same facility really helped the communication. And even though we had scheduled weekly touch-ins, we were constantly working on, either we had delays or procurement issues or design issues. Everybody was in the same area that we could constantly work those details out.
Yeah, and even taking it back one step further, Greg, right? Even further back in the process, we had Siemens team members along with some of your team embedded down in Jacobs Engineering.
Right.
Even early on in the design process, where we could just look behind us and we'd have, right, the guy I was working with was sitting behind me on, from Jacobs or from Columbia when needed. But that was also instrumental, I think. And again, I wouldn't consider them formal meetings, but those informal meetings were almost as important as the formal meetings.
Yeah, and I would add too that once we moved into construction, Greg and his team had set up specific, building specific meetings, which I think were very helpful. Engineering was very involved with them. We were sitting in the trailer with them, and we started to attack things from a building area standpoint. I thought that was very helpful.
I do see a bunch of questions from Mohammed, but Mohammed, I'm going to jump down as I got a couple of yours and go to some new questions here. So we have a question about what are your current experiences with supply chain issues, resource availability, and how are you dealing with this environment? I know this project wrapped up, as COVID was kicking in. So fortunately, we didn't deal with those supply chain issues, but I guess this question is about current things. So a little bit off topic of the project, but anything to add here?
Yeah, I guess, I can chime in on, resource availability is very difficult. Our site in Walpole, we're probably managing, tens, 10, 20, 30 openings, if not more than that, right? And it's very competitive out there right now. So I know we're dealing with a lot of resource constraints today, just for routine operation, and we're juggling that and we're balancing that and we're doing the best we can. It's a tough market out there from a resource perspective. Supply chain issues, we're dealing with the same thing. Our procurement team is working night and day, dealing with a lot of supply chain resources. And our disadvantage, and a lot of the folks on this call could be your disadvantage as well, as we're dealing with we compete with the big pharma, right, that are looking for supplies and looking for supplies to deal with the COVID, with the pandemic, right, from a vaccine manufacturing perspective, from a medicine production perspective. So we deal with them. I mean, we're in queue and we're in line, but a lot of times we fall in priority to some of those guys, since at the end of the day, we're manufacturing the test that determines whether or not you have COVID, or whether you're carrying those antibodies. So it's difficult. It's just extra effort at this point to try to look at any and all options when you're looking at especially material and supply issues.
We were dovetailing that. We were very fortunate in this timestamp when this project happened. I've got a current project that we've ordered the generator, and we won't see it till October of next year. And that's how long, the generators we had for this particular project was 6 to 8 months, and now you're looking at years. So it's something we have to deal with on a daily basis and a lot of workarounds.
Great, and I'm still seeing some great questions here, so let's move along. How are change orders priced and reviewed? Greg, you want to start with that one?
There weren't any.
Tell us why.
Actually, we worked with an overall project budget, and as I stated in one of our slides, we built in contingencies. So, and it was about, I would say about 10% going across the board on almost every single award, understanding that it was very dynamic. And so we drew from those contingencies. They were held by the owner, monitored by PMA, and executed by the construction team. But we actually still ended up under budget, and all our contingencies were within the amounts we specified. So Rob's team did an excellent job putting together original basis design estimate. And then we actually worked from that category. And depending on the complexity, if it was high process area, the contingency would probably be more in the lines of 15 to 18%. If it was office building, it would drop down to about 8 to 9%. But that was all factored in the overall budget. So as far as actual change orders, we were under budget. So we didn't execute any change orders.
Great. This is a fun question. What approaches were used to build an area next to one that had to be online continuously?
Yeah. Want to handle that, Greg, or?
Very carefully.
You had to do that. We had to do that a lot.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was almost, most of the renovation. It was just careful planning. We actually had pull plans, activities with the end users. Again, Dennis's team facilitated. We would meet with the manufacturing group, understand what their utilities were, what their hours were, vibrations, all of that. And we would work together with that team, with our team and Eric's team. And even if we needed some other engineering services from Rob's team to be able to come up with a plan that had zero effect on the adjoining areas. And as Eric said, half of the renovation was that.
Yeah,
Right.
a lot of stark walls, a lot of temporary walls, temporary pathways through areas. Again, we have clean spaces, right? So we had to maintain a lot of clean spaces. So again, very intricate planning, design around those stark walls, and how we were going to clean around them, work through them, little tunnels. We had tunnels throughout the building sometimes where we had to pass through. So a lot of detailed planning, as Greg mentioned.
Yeah, and I think the one example where we had to build in an area next to one that had to be online was when we had to keep the Lyo, one of the freeze dryers, working while we were building the area adjacent to it, and we had to kind of spend some effort designing the HVAC system so we could continue running. And it was a team effort to really come up with a solution that worked. So there's a lot of that across the project.
Yeah. It's always fun making temporary HVAC systems that work.
So I know that we have a closing message from ISPE, and it looked like we could probably complete on time. So I'm going to do one more question, and we'll keep it brief here. So the last question is, how are you able to get regulatory bodies to buy into their urgency for quick reviews and responses to questions? I assume in some cases you had to go back for a revisit several times if there were design iterations.
So I guess I'm going to answer this in one way. You know, we didn't have to go to the regulatory agency very often, right? So part of our renovation was a lot of like for like. So we weren't, as part of this renovation and as part of this expansion, we were not inventing new manufacturing processes. We were replicating a lot of existing processes. So our internal regulatory folks really managed most of the questions that we may have had. So obviously that lends itself to much more rapid turnaround. We had dedicated quality folks that were committed to our team, much like any of the other team members. So that also helped us as a conduit to our regulatory folks to get the answers we needed in a very urgent fashion. So that's kind of my answer there. I'm not sure if anyone has any other commentary there, but.
Great, thanks, Eric. Well, thanks everyone for their time, and Janelle, I'm going to hand it back to you.
Thank you so much, Dennis, Rob, Eric, and Greg, for sharing your expertise with us today. And thank you to everyone who joined today's webinar for your interest and support of ISPE Boston Area Chapter Educational Program. We have shortened our webinar survey to just 2 questions, so please share your feedback. We review that on a monthly basis, and it's very important to us. The email with the survey link will be sent out to you all following today's webinar. I want to call out a save the date for our next event, which will be on December 8th from 12 to 1, and the topic will be continuous manufacturing. Registration will open early next week. So thank you again to our dedicated sponsors, DPS, ICQ Consultants, and Massey Bioservices. On behalf of ISPE Boston and our presenters, thank you again for joining us today. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.